All right, Dr. Hatcher, we are ready to begin.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 60th class in this series on the Abrahamic religions. And now we're down focusing on the Baha'i faith, or at least the heroic period of the Baha'i faith, which is 1844 to the passing of Baha'u'llah that goes all the way to the passing of Abdul Baha in 1921. The class tonight is focused on 3 tablets. We're still in Adrianople, and yet one of them was revealed after they had been removed to Akka. If you looked at the tablets, these are 3 from the collection, The Summons of the Lord of Hosts. And so even though some are revealed in Adrianople and some are revealed in Akka, they're all focused on the revelation of Baha'u'llah as proclaimed by him to the leaders of the world. The theme for tonight, as indicated by the title, is the prophecies and the fulfillment of those prophecies that were made in the 3 tablets we're going to look at tonight. We're saving the Súriy-i-Muluk for next time, together with the Surah of the Branch we will do next time, and 1 or 2 others if we have time, though the Súriy-i-Muluk is well worth a class unto itself. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So here is the title, Prophecies and Proofs, Summons of the Lord of Hosts. And of course, the proofs of the prophecies are the fact that, as we mentioned last time, when he revealed these prophecies about what would happen to these leaders who had rejected him and who had persecuted the Baha'is, of course, all throughout the faith, but in particularly in Adrianople, he told them what was going to happen to them as a direct result of their actions against him and against the members of the community. And so in these same tablets, we have the fact that they become fulfilled. So it's kind of interesting in that we have the prophecies, and then, as I said last time, some of the books, particularly the Súriy-i-Ra'ís and a couple of others, were published before these events became manifest and the prophecies fulfilled, and people were saying, well, I wonder when this is going to happen, and when is the Sultan going to lose his kingdom, and when is the Shah going to lose his kingdom, and so on. And of course, all of these things happen almost immediately after the revelation of these tablets. So the works in the summons are the Súriy-i-Ra'ís, which contains within it the 5 letters. And we've, of course, dealt with the totality of the Súriy-i-Ra'ís in a couple of classes. Tonight, we're dealing with these 3, the Súriy-i-Ra'ís, the Lawḥ-i-Ra'ís, and the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád. The other tablet in this collection, the Súriy-i-Muluk, we will deal with next time. So the Súriy-i-Ra'ís is a chapter, or it's sometimes called, the word Súriy, or of course comes from the word surah, which is the, as we've said before, the chapters in the Quran. And so they can be translated sometimes in the earlier translations of this term in the Baha'i writings as chapters, but usually they're translated as tablets. So at any rate, this is the tablet or the surah of the chief. And the chief in this case is referring not to the head of the government, that is the Sultan Abdulaziz, but to Ali Pasha, the Ottoman prime minister. And it's written for Haji Muhammad Ismaili Kashani, also known as Anis, which means the near one, or the beloved, or the and then Dahi, the sacrifice. So this is the one about whom the tablet is written. So you'll notice in these tablets, Sometimes he's talking directly to Ali Pasha. Sometimes he's talking to the recipient of the letter, or the one that's in honor of, and referring to what's going to happen. This is particularly poignant in the last tablet we'll look at today, the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád, where he, very, very touching tablet, where, well, we'll get to it, won't we? So this is just a brief description. His close friend and fellow Tanzimat. Now, the Tanzimat reformer, I won't describe that in detail, but you can look it up. Suffice it to say, there were sort of conflicting factions in the Ottoman Empire at the upper reaches of government as to what would happen in the future. Some wanted a constitutional government, some wanted to maintain the autonomy of the Sultanate, and so on. Ali Pasha and his dear friend, who is Fu'ád Pasha, died in 1869. And notice this is, so you'll see the relationship between this date when he died and the tablet that's written to him around the same time, just before that, as the acting foreign minister. Upon his death, and that's the death of his friend, Fu'ád Pasha, Ali Pasha took on the roles of both, excuse me, foreign minister and prime minister, or grand vizier. Grieving over the death of Fu'ád Pasha, and with the added stress of enacting reforms by himself, Ali Pasha's health began to deteriorate. He was stricken with tuberculosis and died on 7th of September, 1871, 3 months after 3 months of illness at the age of 56. So he died relatively young, but notice again the date. This is only, again, 3 years after this was written. And so you can see that while maybe the public at large didn't see the connection, as Baha'is, we look at this and see the downfall of these individuals occurred pretty quickly after they were not just pronounced by Baha'u'llah, but pronounced as the consequence of what they had done to Baha'u'llah, but mostly to the followers who were exiled with Baha'u'llah. And if you read these tablets in preparation for tonight, you know when he talks in the second tablet we'll look at about the circumstances that they were in the prison of Akka were most egregious, and the suffering was particularly with the husbands who had to leave their wives, the children who had to come along, and so on. To Ali Pasha, the Grand Vizier, Baha'u'llah addressed the Súriy-i-Ra'ís, my friend Nilufar, who I hope is listening, trying to teach me how to pronounce that, but having a hard time. I'm including, by the way, on our on the slides that I'm going to send to you in PDF form for this class, also a pronunciation guide that was written a long time ago by Marcia Gale, but I still have it because I still find it useful. In this, he bids him hearken to the voice of God, declares that neither his grunting nor the barking of those around him, nor the host of the world can withhold the Almighty from achieving his purpose, accuses him of having perpetuated that which has caused the apostle of God to lament in the most sublime paradise. The apostle of God is another term for Muhammad. He is the prophet, the apostle, and of having conspired with the Persian ambassador to harm him, forecast the manifest loss in which he would soon find himself, glorifies the day of his own revelation, Baha'u'llah's own revelation, prophesies that this revelation will ere long encompass the earth and all that dwell therein, and that the land of mystery, Adrianople, and what is beside it, shall pass out of the hands of the king, and this king is the Sultan, and commotion shall appear, and the voice of lamentation shall be raised, and the evidences of mischief shall be revealed on all sides. Identifies that same revelation with the revelations of Moses and of Jesus, recalls the arrogance of the Persian emperor in the days of Muhammad, and we'll read that in a second, the transgression of Pharaoh in the days of Moses and the impiety of Nimrod in the days of Abraham, and proclaims his purpose to quicken the world and unite its peoples. Now, this is, as I say, the first place I always like to go when I'm looking up what's important about a work, is what the Guardian says about it in God Passes By. Because there's, so many hundreds of works that Baha'u'llah wrote, that the ones that are truly important, you glean that from the emphasis the Guardian places on the tablets. So here is one of the prophecies then from this first work, the Súriy-i-Ra'ís. The day is approaching when the land of mystery and what is beside it, this is of course quoting the same, part of this was what we were just quoting from the Guardian, shall pass out of the hands of the king, the Sultan Abdulaziz, and commotion shall appear and the voice of lamentation shall be raised, and so on. And so this is the passage that he was quoting from. The last part, though, is really quite impressive. The course of things shall be altered and conditions shall wax so grievous that the very sands on the desolate hills will moan, and the trees on the mountain will weep, and blood will flow out of all things. Then wilt thou behold the people in sore distress. Now, what this is referring to, of course, is the imminent fall of the Ottoman Empire in the rebellion of the Young Turks Rebellion, which, though it was fully accomplished later, was already beginning. So this is, he says, parallel to the action taken by Muhammad. Now, what I'm talking about here is this, the same thing that I just quoted from The Guardian, where he says that Muhammad did the same thing in his day. Speaking of this, that Muhammad, and this I did not know prior to studying for tonight's class, that among the kings in the days of Muhammad was Chosroes, I don't know how you pronounce it, Súriy-i-Ra'ís, I guess it is. Our Persian friends can help us after the class. To whom Muhammad sent a blessing. He was the king of the Persian Empire at the time of Muhammad. And Muhammad sent a blessed epistle summoning him unto God and forbidding him from misbelief. So I did not know that Muhammad did, in effect, the same thing that Baha'u'llah did. So he didn't withhold his station or letting the people that and the leaders of the peoples in the area that would be affected most immediately by Islam know who he was. Verily thy Lord knoweth all things, following the promptings of his evil and corrupt desires. However, Chosroes, the monarch who reigned in Persia, waxed arrogant before God, tore up the tablet, reminds you of what the Napoleon III did. He verily is accounted among the inmates of the nethermost fire. This is interesting to me, and I'm sure those of you who read the tablets for tonight felt the same thing about, particularly when we get the last one, and he describes the conversation as Fu'ád is dying. Is there no hope for me? Is there no recourse? But, surely there can be so help. It reminds me of the ending, for those of you who are students of English literature, of the ending of Marlowe's The Tragedy of Dr. Faustus at the end, where he's dragged down to hell. And of course, we don't believe in hell, nor do we believe there is an end point where you can no longer be redeemed. But the point is, there is a point where there is retribution. And so it's pretty stark when we look at it, and we will. So this is to Dachbe, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the DH correct. I don't have the thing in front of me. Sorrow not for that which hath befallen thee. Thou hast borne for my love that which most people have never endured. Thy Lord knoweth and is informed of all. He was with thee in the assemblages and gatherings, and heard that which flowed from the wellspring of thy heart, in remembrance of thy Lord, the all-merciful. So this is, again, another remarkable thing, that Baha'u'llah knows not only what the kings and rulers prayed for or did in privacy, he knows what the teachers of the faith, the faithful, have done in upholding the faith. This indeed is a token of his bountiful favor. Ere long will God raise up from among the kings one who will aid his loved ones. He verily encompasseth all things. He will instill in the hearts the love of his loved ones. This indeed is irrevocably decreed by one who is the Almighty, the Beneficent. And this is in Gleaning, so you probably come across it before this collection came out. Because everybody wants to know who that king will be, and will the king be a Persian king, a king in Iran, or so on. But it sounds irrevocable. So there's a prophecy that, as far as we know, has not come true, unless it's referring to perhaps Queen Maria of Romania or so on. A discourse on the soul. I'm not going to go through this. It's incredibly interesting, though. He stops in the. This is from the friend to whom this is dedicated. He's obviously asked him a question about the soul. He says, as to thy question regarding the soul. Now, most of what he's going to say here, we've already gone over before in discussing the Baha'i concept of the soul and so on. But let's look at a few of the passages here. As to thy question regarding the soul, know that among the people there are numerous treatises, manifold views as to its stations. Among these are the soul of the kingdom, the soul of the dominion, the celestial soul, the divine soul, the sanctified soul, as well as the benevolent soul, the contented soul, the soul pleasing unto God, the inspired soul, the irascible soul, the concupiscent soul. Every group hath its own pronouncements concerning the soul, and we are disinclined to dwell upon the sayings of the past. There is a talk that Hubert Dunbar gives where he goes into these to a certain extent. If you go down to the third paragraph here, know that the soul which is common to all men cometh forth following the commingling of things and after their maturation, as thou dost observe in the germ. And the germ is the egg or the fetus. Once it hath developed to its predestined stage, God manifesteth the soul that was latent within it. Thy Lord verily doeth what he willeth and ordaineth what he pleaseth. This gets into some very complex philosophical discourse that we could spend a long time on, but I presume you can read it on your own. But the main thing he gets at is that all of the human powers emanate from the soul and cannot be distinguished from it. And then in this third paragraph, you see, know also that the soul is endowed with two wings. Should it soar to the atmosphere of love and contentment, then it will be related to the all-merciful. And should it fly into the atmosphere of self and desire, then it will pertain to the evil one. And again, this confuses a lot of people who aren't familiar with the writings. Why is the evil one capitalized if we don't believe there is an evil one? And the answer is because in literature, when you personify something, you give it a character that is grammatically correct to capitalize it. So even though the evil one refers to the satanic aspects or the selfish aspects of the soul, it's capitalized in this personification. May God shield and protect us and protect you therefrom, O ye who perceive. Should the soul become ignited with the fire of the love of God, it is called benevolent and pleasing unto God. But should it be consumed with the fire of passion, it is known as the concupiscent soul. And so he's going into a description or definition of some of those categories of soul. Thus have we expounded this subject for thee, that thou mayest obtain a clear understanding. And of course, we've talked a lot about the soul before. We will do so again, but some of the clearest discussions of the soul are by Abdu'l-Baha in Some Answered Questions. The first paragraph here, O pen of the Most High, recount unto him that which who have turned into thy lore, the O glorious, that which shall enable him to dispense with the sayings of men. Say, and this is where he talks about that all of these powers of the human powers, of spirit, mind, soul, and the powers of sight and hearing are but one single reality which hath manifold expressions owing to the diversity of its instruments. Its instruments meaning that of the soul. So in other words, the soul can manifest itself through various powers and capacities that we have. As thou dost observe man's power to comprehend, move, speak, hear, and see, all derive from this sign of his Lord within him. It is single in its essence, yet manifold through the diversity of its instrument. That's a beautiful passage, a very important one, because the soul is, and this is one of the arguments for the continuity or the continuation of the soul after death, is that the body disintegrates because it's composite. It's composed of various physical elements. The soul is one essence. It is therefore indivisible, and therefore it can never become decomposed. And therefore it continues to exist. And from this single essence, indivisible essence, emanate these particular powers. So this is a very interesting discourse that sort of and of course, there are various others in Gleanings where Baha'u'llah goes into great detail about the nature of the soul, which he says is ultimately unknowable in any refined sense, but we can know things about it. So the second tablet that we come to is the Lawḥ-i-Ra'ís, which also contains passages directed to Ali Pasha, was revealed shortly after Baha'u'llah's incarceration in the citadel of Akka and includes a chilling denunciation of the character of the minister. And this is the quote from the Universal House of Justice in the introduction to the summons of the Lord of Hosts. In the Lawḥ-i-Ra'ís, we find these prophetic words recorded: Hearken, O chief, to the voice of God, the sovereign, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Thou hast, O chief, committed that which hath made Mohammed, the apostle of God, grown in the most exalted paradise. The world hath made thee proud, so much so that thou hast turned away from the face through whose brightness the concourse on high hath been illumined. Soon thou shalt find thyself in evident loss. So here's a prophecy. And of course, we know that comes true 3 years later. Not only is Adrianople conquered, but of course, the chief himself dies in 71. Now, I repeat here an image of the Sultan Abdulaziz because it is he, I feel, that is most appropriately alluded to when we have this famous analogy in the Lawḥ-i-Ra'ís of the puppet show. And this is a very famous story, and it's been in the Baha'i writings for a long time before this complete translation of this work was made available to us. I presume you read it. If not, we'll repeat it very briefly, but basically the idea is that Baha'u'llah, in talking to the chief, repeats for him an experience he had as a child when he watched a puppet show showing a king and his court and a war and all of these things taking place in this grandiose trappings of the king and so on. And then as he watched the puppeteer come out of the tent with a box, and Baha'u'llah as a young boy asked, what happened to all these grand figures and so on? And he replies, they're all in this box. And of course, this is once again a theme we repeated previously many times, this ubi sunt theme. This is, where are those who were before us? Meaning, where are the possessions and grandeur of the kings of the past? It's a very prominent theme in English literature. And of course, the answer is always the same. They're turned into dust. Everybody meets the same end. And what possessions you think you have, you will not take with you. So he repeats to the chief, O exponent of might and power. A very interesting thing here to me, he says that there was a major by the name of Umar who came into our presence, and we told him, and here's what he told him: from the outset, a gathering should have been convened at which the learned men of this age, and he's talking about this is after the fact. He says, upon our arrival in Gallipoli, in Gallipoli, and of course, this is on the way out of Adrianople. They go by foot to Gallipoli, and then they take the boat, the ship, and they go from there to, they make one stop, but then they go to Alexandria. God is well aware of what he said. After some exchanges in which his own innocence and thy guilt were mentioned, we declared from the outset, here he's telling Umar, this is what should have taken place, and everything would have worked out quite differently. In effect, if you had conducted your affairs properly, you would have done this. A gathering should have been convened at which the learned men of this age could have met with this youth in order to determine what offense these servants have committed. Now, of course, you remember that Baha'u'llah, throughout his ministry, challenges anyone to question him, to confront him. He did it, if you remember, most recently in our classes with Mirza Yahya, challenged, said, meet me, and we will, in effect, debate this thing, and Mirza Yahya didn't show up. Remember back in Baghdad, the ulama and the mujtahids, the divines and clerics, he challenged, they said, do a miracle. And he says, okay, I'll do whatever you decide, but you must agree on it. And if I perform it, you must agree to that I'm correct. And you must, I don't know if he said you must agree to follow me, but in effect, you must say that I am who I claim to be. And of course, the outcome was that they couldn't agree on anything. And they were also afraid of, what if he really pulls it off? What do we do? But now the matter hath gone beyond such considerations, and according to thine own assertion, thou art charged with incarcerating us in the most desolate of cities. Now remember, they aren't there yet. There is a matter which, if thou findest it possible, I request thee to submit to his majesty the Sultan, that for 10 minutes this youth be enabled to meet him, so that he may demand whatsoever he deemeth as a sufficient testimony, regardeth as proof of the veracity of him who is the truth. Should God enable him to produce it, let him then release these wronged ones. Now, he's not just talking about himself, but all of the followers, and leave them to themselves. So again, this challenge, this brazen challenge of Baha'u'llah, only need 10 minutes. And of course, he goes on to say, I never heard anything. He promised to transmit this message and to give us his reply. We received, however, no news from him, although it becometh him not, who is the truth, to present himself before any person, and as much as all have been created to obey him, yet in view of the condition of these little children and the large number of women so far removed from their friends and countries, we have acquiesced in this matter. In spite of this, nothing has resulted. And then this wonderful line here, Umar himself is alive and accessible. Inquire from him that the truth may be made known unto you. Again, he crosses every T, dots every I, Baha'u'llah does. He leaves nothing for us to challenge in the way of evidence of what he does. And so, I mean, if you want to check out that I really did this and made this challenge, ask Umar. He's alive, he's well, he's available. Ask him and he'll verify it. And now he describes in this same tablet the dire conditions that once they were moved into the prison itself. Most of our companions now lie sick in this prison, and none knoweth what befell us except God, the Almighty, the All-Knowing. In the days following our arrival, 2 of these servants hasted to the realm above to died. For an entire day, the guards insisted that until they were paid for the shrouds and burial, those blessed bodies could not be removed, although no one had requested any help from them. At that time, we were devoid of earthly means and pleaded that they leave the matter unto us and allow those present to carry the bodies, but they refused. Finally, a carpet was taken to the bazaar to be sold, and the sum obtained was delivered to the guards. Later, it was learned that they had merely dug a shallow grave into which they had placed both blessed bodies, although they had taken twice the amount required for shrouds and burial. We now get to the 3rd tablet, the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád. This was revealed shortly after the death of Fu'ád Pasha, and we saw that he died in 1869. This was the friend. Again, this is what he looked like, and he died which, as we read at the outset, caused considerable grief to Ali Pasha, because they were in league together in trying, as you can see, Fu'ád Pasha was a fervent supporter of keeping the empire an absolute monarchy. And the empire we're talking about here, again, remember, is the long-standing Ottoman Empire that dominated most of Islam and dominated most of the Middle East during its reign. The ideas of being legally bounded or restricted by a constitution or legislature, rejecting the idea of a constitution or a legislature. He often clashed with the liberal intellectuals on this point. So the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád, revealed in 1869, shortly after the death of Fu'ád Pasha, the Ottoman minister to whose machinations it refers, describes the spiritual consequences of the abuse of power and foretells, and here we have another prophecy, the imminent downfall of his colleague, Ali Pasha, and the overthrow of the Sultan himself, prophecies that were widely circulated and whose dramatic fulfillment added greatly to the prestige of their author. And this again is from the House of Justice, quoted in the introduction to the collection, The Summons of the Lord of Hosts. And that's the picture of Fu'ád Pasha. So what fascinated me, among many other things, is the meaning of the word Fu'ád, because Fu'ád, I'm most familiar with, is the translation, is translated into the inmost heart, or the heart. And so you have here what I call a triple entendre, and that is, it's the name of the apostle of Baha'u'llah to whom the tablet is addressed. Remember, it starts out with those 2 letters, the Kaf and the Zal, which stand for Kazim, Sheikh Kazim Isa Mandar, an apostle of Baha'u'llah to whom the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád is addressed. Its subject is the former statesman of the Ottoman Empire, Fu'ád Pasha, who died in France in 1869. The letter names Kaf and Za refer to the name Kazim. So you have the letter addressed to one who is faithful to Baha'u'llah, so the word Fu'ád in relation to him is appropriate. The name of the statesman, Fu'ád Pasha, and then you have the contrast of the inmost heart of both men who had equal opportunities to follow Baha'u'llah. One succeeds and the other fails, and as we will see, fails in a rather horrible fashion if we are to take in any way as whether literally true or just capturing the essence of the experience of this man as he is dying or after he has died is pretty frightening. This is from the tablet, and this again a prophecy. Soon will we dismiss the one who was like unto him, Ali Pasha, and will lay hold on their chief who ruled the land. And the chief in this case is not referring to Ali Pasha, it's referring to Sultan Abdulaziz. And I verily am the Almighty, the All-Compelling. Be thou steadfast in the cause of God, and extol thy Lord morn and eve. Suffer, now of course he's talking here to his apostle, and he was one of the apostles of Baha'u'llah. Suffer not the light of thy soul to be quenched by the calumnies of the one who was so blinded by our bestowals as to turn away from God, the Lord of all names. He inspireth his devoted followers even as the evil one prompteth his own. And again, if you don't know the theology and the theological tenets of the faith, you would certainly think this is literally a being, you know. Ere long shalt thou behold him in evident loss, both in this world and in the world to come. All right. So this idea that many believers in the afterlife, that everyone has the same experience and everyone is forgiven and so on, not so. The Baha'i writings say quite differently, though the Baha'i writings also make clear, and this is a very important theological point and ontological point, that we are always, that redemption is always available to us, even in the next world. And there's a particular passage in Some Answered Questions that states that point blank. But the initial experience for someone who has rejected God and has lived an evil life is obviously most grievous, and we're going to take a look at it. He indeed is among those whom an afflictive torment doth await. He dispatched, well, you can say afflictive torment, but how can there be afflictive torment if you don't have a physical being? Well, if you've ever had some dire illness that afflicted you, or clinical depression, or any other affective disorder, you know it can be at least as grievous, if not more so, than any physical ailment. And so the idea that you can have torment without a physical body, even though they're often in the old scriptures expressed in physical terms so people could understand it, it still is something, it still should induce the fear of God. He dispatched an epistle to someone in that land, a writ of the workers of iniquity, in which he mocked God and recorded that which filled all creatures with dismay. Say, canst thou find anyone to protect thee when the wrath of God, the all-powerful, the unconstrained, is visited upon thee? And of course, that's a rhetorical question. The answer is absolutely not. And this is the proof that comes true. And it's, we'll see, there's a couple of slides here. They're very interesting in this respect. Thus have we informed thee of that which lieth concealed within the hearts of men. Now he's talking to his apostle here. Verily thy Lord is the Almighty, the All-Knowing. Arise for the triumph of this cause and gather together my loved ones. Help them to see the truth in this day when the feet of men have slipped. Say, it behooveth every true believer to assist his Lord. He verily is your helper, while the people have no one to turn to in this day. Then we seized Mehdi. Now, Mehdi is not Mirza Mehdi, but he is a judge he's alluding to here, and this is in a footnote or an end note. He was a judge in Constantinople who supported Mirza Yahya. We seized Mehdi, to whom we had promised divine chastisement in our books and scriptures. When our awful majesty encompassed him, he entreated, may I not retrace my steps? Can I have a do-over? And a voice exclaimed, woe betide thee, O disbeliever in the day of resurrection. This is the nethermost fire, and its flames have been made to blaze for thee. Thou didst forsake all righteous deeds in thy vain and futile life, and now thou hast none to shield thee from God. Thou art indeed he who caused all hearts to be consumed, and the Holy Spirit to lament. He pleaded, is there yet no refuge for me? Nay, by my Lord, even shouldst thou seek recourse to every possible means. Thereupon he cried out in such distress as to cause the people of the graves to tremble, and was seized by the hand of invincible power. A voice then proclaimed, return to the seat of wrath in the fire of hell. Wretched and evil be thine abode. That's scary stuff, isn't it? And yet, again, we know that it's true in the sense that in the, what shall we say, in the poetic terms it is speaking, that in effect, there will be retribution. Remember this hidden word that where Baha'u'llah says that I will forgive no man his injustice. So if we have, this is a good subject for us to talk about at length on another class, and that is the nature of what is considered sinful in the Baha'i faith, and what is our destiny insofar as, of course, the Baha'i faith, the writings of Baha'u'llah in the Gleanings says that when we die, we will review our life and assess all we have done. And we will regret those things we have done poorly, if they're injustice. And no doubt, if we've done enough injustice, we shall experience some retributive response for that. But it's not eternal. In other words, nothing, remember this premise of Abdul Baha, nothing in this world or the next world is in a state of stasis or is static. Everything is in motion, and that includes the soul. So we are either progressing or regressing, whether in this life or the next. Though in the next life, Abdul Baha says, there is no regression, there is only progression. But he goes on to say, to cease to progress in the next life is tantamount to regression. We can discuss that in the Q&A after the class if you want. So this is a lovely passage in the very second paragraph here to his faithful apostle. Thus did we lay hold on him as we laid hold on those who preceded him. Behold their houses which we have left to the spiders. And take heed, O ye who are endued with understanding. He it is who opposed God, and for whom the verses of wrath were revealed in the book. Blessed is he who readeth it and pondereth its contents, for a goodly end doth in truth await him. And then he speaks to his apostle. Thus have we recounted, this is all to his apostle, but the last part is so beautiful. Thus have we recounted unto thee the tale of the evildoers, that thine eyes may be solaced. As for thee, there lieth in store naught but a blissful end. Isn't that beautiful? So, what was the outcome? What is the proof regarding these prophecies? This is from God Passes By. And I believe it's also, much of this is also in The Promised Day Has Come. Sultan Abdulaziz, who with Nasiruddin Shah was the author of the calamities heaped upon Baha'u'llah, and was himself responsible for 3 decrees of banishment against the Prophet, who had been stigmatized in the Kitab-i Aqdas as occupying the throne of tyranny, and whose fall had been prophesied in the Lawḥ-i-Fu'ád, was deposed in consequence of a palace revolution. This is Sultan Abdulaziz. One was condemned by a fatwa, a sentence, and the mufti in his own capital was 4 days later assassinated in 1876, and was succeeded by a nephew who was declared to be an imbecile. Doesn't sound like the Guardian would use such a term, does it? But it must be factual rather than an opinion. So again, notice the years, 76. This is only 8 years later after, really 7 years after the revealing of that tablet. The war of 1877 to 78 emancipated 11 million people from the Turkish yoke. This is the overthrow of the Ottoman Empire. Adrianople was occupied by Russian forces. The empire itself was dissolved as a result of the war of 1914 to 18. And the Sultanate was abolished, a republic was proclaimed, and a rulership that endured above 6 centuries was ended. That is the Sultanate, the Sunni, it was a Sunni-based government, as it were. And it endured for 6 centuries. It had ruled the whole of the Middle East, save for Persia and a few other areas. And it was abolished. The vain and despotic, did I just read that? No, here it is. The vain and despotic Nasiruddin Shah, denounced by Baha'u'llah as the prince of oppressors, of whom he had written that he would soon be made an object lesson for the world, whose reign was stained by the execution of the Bab and the imprisonment of Baha'u'llah, who had personally instigated his subsequent banishments to Constantinople, Adrianople, and Akkon, who, in collusion with a vicious sacerdotal order, had vowed to strangle the faith in its cradle, was dramatically assassinated in the shrine of Shah Abdulazim on the very eve of his jubilee, which, as ushering in a new era, was to have been celebrated with the most elaborate magnificence and was to go down in history as the greatest day in the annals of the Persian nation. The fortunes of his house thereafter steadily declined, and finally, through the scandalous misconduct of the dissipated and irresponsible Ahmad Shah, led to the eclipse and disappearance of the Qajar dynasty, which also had a long history. So that's the end of my presentation for tonight. Hope you got something out of it. It was, again, very difficult to extricate from these 3 magnificent tablets some highlights that I thought were appropriate. You could present them in many other ways. So let me stop sharing my screen. And if any of you have questions, please put them in the chat, or if you want to deliver them directly, Alex will recognize you, and we'll be glad to hear what you have to say. You can make comments, add to what I've said, or ask questions that either I or someone else in our class can answer, perhaps.